After 3 rounds in Wijk aan Zee, the cream is rising to the top. Karyakin defeated Wang Hao, Anand defeated Caruana, and Magnus Carlsen scored against Loek van Wely, and that's my play of the day for round 3. Okay, let's go from the beginning. Carlsen had the white pieces and began with the English, and Van Wely was clearly up for a fight because the game quickly transposed into a King's Indian. Both players playing pretty quickly, and Carlsen selects the so-called Averbach variation, named after Yuri Averbach, who developed this system in the 1950s. Yuri Averbach, of course, the world's oldest living grandmaster. He's 90 years old. And, well, this has a very good reputation. It's currently not very fashionable, but, well, this is Carlsen's strength. He often manages to find systems that aren't very popular at the moment, but he gives them a new lease of life. And, well, let's see what happened today. There are many systems that black can play against the Averbach, and in fact Van Wely has played several different systems, so maybe that's an indication that he's never been quite happy with, playing against this. So, for example, previously he's played h6 and then e5 and system with knight a6. Incidentally, this shows one of the ideas behind the Averbach variation. By delaying the development of the knight on g1 and playing the bishop to e2, of course the bishop controls squares here, which means that knight h5 is discouraged because it can be taken, but also it allows white to play the pawn to g4, setting up his own attack on the king's side. That's just one of the ideas behind this. Anyway, today Van Wely played c5. Okay, it's a respectable move. And now we have a kind of Benoni structure. But there is a difference between this and the normal Benoni, as we'll see in a second. Difference is that white is not obliged to recapture with a c-pawn. You can play e takes d5. So there are no problems associated with the pawn on e4, but white manages to keep this very pleasant space advantage with the pawn on d5. And now a normal move, of course, would be just to play rook e8. And let me just very briefly show you a typical Averbach position. Okay, black is rather cramped, so bishop g4 is a common move here to exchange off this bishop, which really doesn't have a very good diagonal. So black exchanges off and plays knight d7. But in these kind of positions, it's been shown that white actually has a very pleasant advantage in this endgame. Even after all the rooks are exchanged, white stands well, because these knights never reach good squares, but white manages to press on both sides of the board, in particular the king side. There we go, let me just show you very quickly. Basically, the bishops and the king will support an advance of pawns on the king side, and you can see those knights, black's knights never reach good squares. Black never finds counterplay here, and this is absolutely typical for the Averbach variation, and we're going to see something very similar in this game. Okay, let me go back. So here, well, Van Wely played queen b6, which has been seen before, but it looks slightly odd to attack with the queen at such an early stage of the game before really much development has taken place. But well, when I looked this up, this is apparently all theory. It's all well, at least it's all been played before. Okay, bishop f5. Now this looks normal to play the knight into e4, but it's interesting. Van Wely was taking some time over his moves. Carlsen was playing relatively quickly. He had a 5-minute think over knight h4. Knight h4 is an excellent move, pressurising the bishop straight away. And of course, if the bishop goes back, then white just castles and everything's fine. Still has this space advantage, which really hasn't been challenged. So Van Wely went in with the knight after almost a 15-minute think. And although this has been seen before, it's actually, Carlsen shows that this really isn't a very attractive variation for black. You can see that bishop basically is rather short of squares in the middle of the board. You can really only go back to f5, and then, it's going to be chopped off. Okay, first of all, Van Wely took on c3, took on b2, threatening bishop c3. Okay, that's prevented. So, okay, black has won a pawn, but this bishop is stuck. So bishop f5. Previously, in previous games, h6 has been played, but, this is also, let's say, a little unpleasant for black. Although in one game, black managed to survive, a game Polagowski against Gufeld. Gufeld managed to survive in this position, but okay, white is definitely better here. Again, space advantage, 2 bishops. Okay, back to this position. Van Wely played bishop f5, and I really don't like this move. I think h6 is a better move, even though it's not very pleasant. So Carlsen simply exchanged queens, and here rook c2 has previously been played, but rook b1 is such an obvious improvement. I mean, I doubt whether Carlsen knew this had been played before. It just looks a very simple move, rook b1. Check. And now here Van Wely played rook e8, a move I really don't like. I think black's only chance is to hold the b pawn with b6, although after this, hitting the f pawn, I still I very much like white's position. Okay, once again we have a mobile pawn majority on the king side, which will be supported by the bishops, and you can see black's queenside pawn majority is going nowhere because it can be cramped by these pawns. And once again, typically for the Averbach variation, this knight on b8 really doesn't find a very good square to go to, so white would have the advantage there. However, I think Van Wely should play that. In the game, once b7 was taken, material is now even, but black is left with that really sickly pawn on f5, and I think objectively black is just lost in this position. a3 from Carlsen, excellent move, covering b4, preventing that knight finding a decent square. Okay, Van Wely exchanged off the active rook. Bishop d3, hitting f5. Now, what impressed me about Carlsen's technique was that he didn't rush at all. He made sure everything was perfect before he cashed in. So, for example, after bishop takes f5, knight e5 prevents the bishop coming back to defend the pawn. I think white would be better here, but it could be a little bit complicated. Instead, he took his time. He didn't rush at all. There's no need to rush in this position because that pawn is not running away. Okay, the bishop is attacked. It must retreat. Now the rook can swing over. Notice that all the squares on the e file are covered by the bishops. So black has 0 counterplay in this position. Okay, threat rook b7. So black must play knight b6. Bishop f4, excellent move. Now if the rook goes to d8 to defend the pawn, you can see black is very passive indeed. Still no need to take that pawn. Let's just increase the pressure. Rook a5, lovely move. If the knight retreats, then we're free to take on f5. And if rook d7, bishop takes f5, hits the rook, and that looks pretty miserable. Okay, this can be taken, but white is simply winning that position with the two bishops. Should be winning. Let's go back. So Van Wely tried bishop e5, and again Carlsen was very careful with his technique. Of course, he could take on e5, and after pawn takes, well, he's going to pick this up. Also after rook takes, white is going to be able to force the rook away and very soon take on f5. But I like Carlsen's technique. What he did was he kept the two bishops. Rook e1's an excellent move. Okay, king g7, there's nothing better. Bishop g3, threatening f4, exploiting the pin and winning a piece. So rook e7 is forced. So after f4, the bishop comes back to f6. Carlsen exchanged. And now a nice bit of regrouping. Still doesn't take here because that can be taken. But this is very nice. Means that the king can't defend from f6 because it'll always be checked away. Okay, everything is solid. King b3. Now there's a threat to take on f5. And after king g6, h3, Van Wely resigned in this position. The threat, of course, is to play g4, and exploiting the pin, white wins the pawn on f5. And there is absolutely no defense to this. So, for example, if black attempts to cover the f5 pawn with the knight, well, white has so many ways to win this position, but the simplest is just to play bishop a5, followed by bishop c7, winning the pawn on d6, and the game is over. And of course, well, if white is just allowed to play g4 and takes, then okay, it's a terribly simple win. You just push kingside pawns and maintain threats on the queen side. It's all over for black. Superb technique from Carlsen. So the scores now: Karyakin leads with 2.5 out of 3. Anand, Carlsen and Hari Krishna on 2 out of 3. Hari Krishna managed to hold Aronian today. Okay, round 4 tomorrow, and we've got some good matchups to look forward to, including Aronian against Anand and Carlsen against Hari Krishna. Thanks for watching.